The last stand of humanity. The sun was setting on a broken world. The sky, once bright and clear, was now dark and filled with smoke. The alien invaders had arrived years ago, bringing with them destruction, chaos, and death. Humanity, the proud race that once ruled the earth, was now on the brink of extinction. Cities lay in ruins, and the few remaining humans were scattered, hiding in the shadows, fighting to survive. In the middle of this war-torn earth, one soldier stood alone, determined to make a final stand. His name was Sergeant Ethan Blake, and he was humanity's last hope. He had seen his comrades fall one by one, but he refused to give up. The alien forces were relentless, but Blake was determined to protect what was left of his world. Blake crouched behind the ruins of a collapsed building, his pulse racing. He could hear the alien warships overhead, their engines humming like a distant storm. The enemy was closing in, and there was nowhere left to run. He had fought to the last man, to the last bullet. And now, as the final wave of the alien invaders approached, he knew this would be his last battle. His weapon, a battered rifle, was still in his hands. He checked the ammo, only a handful of rounds left. He didn't need much. Blake wasn't going to let them win, not without a fight. He pressed his back against the cold stone of the building and peered out at the advancing enemy. The aliens were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. They were tall, with skin as dark as the night and eyes that glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. Their ships were massive, hovering silently above the ground. They moved in perfect formation, like a swarm of locusts preparing to finish what they had started. Blake's breath slowed, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any weakness. The alien forces were strong, but they weren't invincible. They had underestimated humanity, thinking they could wipe out the human race with ease. But they hadn't counted on the will to fight, the courage to survive. Blake's fingers tightened around the rifle. He had been through hell, but this was it. The final stand. There was no running, no more reinforcements. It was just him against the alien invaders, and he wasn't going to give up without a fight. The first of the aliens stepped into view, its long, clawed feet scraping against the rubble. Blake's heart skipped a beat. The creature was enormous, at least twice the size of a human, with a face that looked like a nightmare. Its eyes glowed, searching for any signs of life. Blake knew he had to act fast. He raised his rifle, took aim, and fired. The shot echoed through the empty streets, but it was nothing more than a whisper against the alien's thick armor. The alien staggered back, surprised by the impact, but it wasn't enough. Blake quickly reloaded, taking cover behind the building again as more of the aliens approached. The sound of alien footsteps grew louder. Blake knew he couldn't hold out much longer. The enemy was too strong, too many. He needed a miracle. Then the ground shook. It wasn't an explosion, but a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. Blake froze. Was it an earthquake? No, it was something else. Something more terrifying. The aliens seemed to notice it too. They paused, their heads tilting as if listening for something. Blake's heart pounded in his chest. What was happening? Where was that sound coming from? Before he could react, the alien forces suddenly scattered, their formation breaking apart. Blake's confusion grew. Had they retreated? Was this his chance? No. The rumbling grew louder. It was coming from deep underground, from somewhere that shouldn't exist. Blake turned toward the source of the noise, his mind racing. What had been hidden beneath the surface all this time? Suddenly, a flash of light illuminated the horizon. The aliens looked up, their eyes widening in shock. A massive shape was emerging from the ground. An enormous vault, cracked open like an ancient tomb, its contents stirring to life. Blake's eyes widened as the rumbling stopped, and the vault's doors slowly creaked open. Out of the darkness, something was emerging. Something ancient, something powerful. It wasn't the aliens, though. No, this was something different, something from humanity's past. The aliens seemed frozen in place for a moment, unsure of what was happening. But Blake knew. He knew that whatever was emerging from that vault was humanity's last chance. The vault doors creaked open further, revealing what lay inside. Frozen soldiers, lined up in rows, their bodies encased in ice, stood like statues, waiting for the moment they would be needed. Blake's heart raced. These were no ordinary soldiers. These were Earth's final line of defense, soldiers that had been frozen long before the invasion, stored away for a time like this. As the first of the frozen soldiers stirred, Blake's breath caught in his throat. They were waking up. Earth's forgotten warriors were coming to life, and they were going to fight. Blake didn't know how or why this vault had remained hidden all these years, but there was no time to question it. He knew only one thing. Humanity's last stand was not over. Earth had one final weapon, and it was about to unleash its fury on the alien invaders. The frozen warriors were waking up. Earth's final hope had arrived. Earth's forgotten soldiers stir. The ground beneath Earth seemed to pulse with a strange, deep rhythm, like a heartbeat echoing from an ancient world. As the vault doors slowly creaked open, the tremors that had shaken the Earth began to subside. Yet the silence that followed was deafening, thick and unsettling. For a moment, it seemed like nothing had changed. The alien forces, still scattered across the war-torn streets, remained frozen, unsure of what had just transpired. Sergeant Ethan Blake, still crouched behind a ruined building, couldn't believe what he was seeing. The ice-coated vault, once hidden beneath miles of Earth's surface, now stood wide open. Inside, rows of frozen soldiers stirred. Blake's heart raced as he watched one of the soldiers' hands twitch, the ice surrounding their bodies cracking and splintering. Was this real? Were these soldiers really coming back to life? For what felt like an eternity, the soldiers remained still, as if they were trapped in time itself. The last of humanity's defense lay dormant, waiting for the signal to awaken. Blake didn't know how long they had been frozen. Perhaps centuries, perhaps mere decades, but the moment had come. The warriors inside the vault were the key to Earth's survival. Blake took a tentative step forward, his hand instinctively gripping his rifle. He couldn't be sure if these soldiers would even recognize him as an ally. They were relics of a forgotten era. Could they be trusted? Before he could think further, the first soldier fully emerged from his frozen tomb. It wasn't just a man. It was a giant, towering over the remains of the vault. The soldier's armor shimmered with a cold, metallic sheen, untouched by time. The ice that had encased him shattered with a sharp crack, sending small pieces scattering across the ground. The warrior's eyes snapped open, glowing a fierce blue. His gaze was intense, scanning the surroundings as though he had been awake all along. He stood tall, muscles rippling under the heavy armor. His movements were swift, precise, and full of purpose. This wasn't some simple soldier. This was a warrior bred for one purpose: war. Status report. The soldier's voice boomed, as clear and strong as if he had never been frozen. Blake's mind raced. The voice was unmistakable. It was commanding, yet calm, as though the soldier had no doubt in his mind about the situation. But Blake had no answer. He didn't know how to respond. All he knew was that the soldier was here, and this could be humanity's last chance. More soldiers began to emerge from the vault, each one more imposing than the last. They weren't just soldiers. They were a special breed, engineered for combat. Their faces were mostly hidden behind helmets with dark visors, but Blake could see their eyes. Cold, calculating, and filled with the same fierce determination that burned in his chest. These soldiers had been waiting for this moment, a moment when humanity was on the brink of extinction. Blake stepped closer, carefully watching the warriors as they assembled, their movements like a well-rehearsed dance. These were no ordinary men. They were enhanced, genetically modified, and equipped with technology far beyond anything Blake had ever seen. The first warrior turned toward him, his gaze locking with Blake's. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The soldier's eyes flickered with recognition, and then, almost as if he had been given a silent command, he nodded toward Blake. "I am Captain Valen," the soldier said, his voice deep and resonating. "We have awoken. What is the status of humanity?" Blake felt a wave of relief flood over him. These soldiers weren't hostile. They were here to help. But the weight of their awakening was overwhelming. How had this army been kept hidden for so long? What was their purpose? We've lost," Blake said, his voice hoarse. "The aliens, they've wiped out most of us. I'm the last of the human soldiers. There's nothing left." Captain Valen's expression remained neutral, but Blake could see the subtle shift in his posture. A hint of sadness passed through his eyes, quickly replaced by cold determination. "Then we will not allow their victory to stand," Captain Valen declared. "We will take back Earth." Blake's heart skipped a beat. The warriors, Earth's frozen super soldiers, were about to wage war once again. But this time, it wasn't for training or drills. This time, it was for survival. The other soldiers began to stir, their voices melding together in a chorus of readiness. They were checking their weapons, adjusting their armor, and preparing for the task ahead. These weren't ordinary soldiers, and this wasn't an ordinary battle. They had been designed for one thing: to be the ultimate fighting force. They were humanity's last line of defense. Blake was still reeling from the shock of seeing the soldiers awake, but he knew there was no time to waste. The alien invaders were already regrouping, their warships still circling above the wreckage of the cities. If Blake and these warriors didn't act fast, Earth would be lost forever. "We have the technology to defeat the alien forces," Captain Valen continued, his voice steady. "We are the last hope of Earth. But we need your leadership, Sergeant Blake. You are the last human soldier. You understand the situation better than anyone else." Blake stared at Captain Valen, trying to wrap his mind around what was happening. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was the beginning of a war, one that could decide the fate of the human race. These warriors were a weapon, and Blake had to lead them. The soldiers finished their preparations, standing tall and ready for the fight. The air was thick with tension, but Blake could feel a spark of hope. The Earth's final defense had awakened, and they were ready to reclaim their world. Captain Valen turned to Blake. "Let's end this, Sergeant. For Earth, for humanity." Blake nodded, gripping his rifle tightly. The battle was far from over, but with Earth's frozen warriors at his side, humanity had one last chance. And this time, they wouldn't fail. The awakening of the frozen army. The soldiers stood in eerie silence, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkened sky. They were no longer frozen statues, but living warriors, fully aware of the battle they had just awoken to. Their movements were fluid, purposeful, each step measured, each breath filled with purpose. They had been frozen for an unknown amount of time, but their minds and bodies were primed for war. It was as if they had never been frozen at all. Sergeant Blake watched as Captain Valen took command of the growing army of frozen warriors. The other soldiers had awakened quickly, their battle-ready expressions replacing the blank stares that had once filled their icy chambers. Every one of them had a role to play, a skill to offer. This was no ordinary army. This was Earth's final weapon, designed to fight, to win, and to survive at all costs. Valen stood tall at the front of the formation, his voice cutting through the air with precision and authority. "Form up," he commanded, his voice echoing across the ruined city. The frozen warriors obeyed without hesitation, moving into tightly organized lines. There was no question. These soldiers had been trained for this very moment. They knew what needed to be done. Blake stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Captain Valen. "What now?" he asked, his voice hoarse but filled with determination. He had come to terms with his role in this final battle, but now that Earth's last line of defense had arrived, he needed to know what their first step would be. Valen turned to him, his cold eyes narrowing with thought. "We need to reclaim the strategic points across the city. The alien invaders are in control of the major communications hubs and energy facilities. If we can take them back, we can cripple their forces. We strike fast. We strike hard." Blake nodded. He had spent years fighting a losing battle against the alien forces, but now, with this incredible army at his side, it felt like a real chance to win. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for a future. As they prepared to leave the vault, Blake couldn't help but notice the differences between these soldiers and the humans he had once fought alongside. These warriors were machines of war, perfectly disciplined, stronger and faster than any human soldier he had ever known. Some of them were human, but others were different, modified, enhanced with technology that Blake couldn't begin to understand. Yet, despite their overwhelming power, there was something almost tragic about them. They had been hidden away for so long, forgotten by history, until now when they were needed the most. These soldiers had never had a chance to live a normal life. Their sole purpose had been to fight, to be the ultimate weapon in humanity's defense. And now, that purpose had arrived. Humanity's final chance rested on their shoulders. Captain Valen addressed his troops once again, his voice unwavering. "We are the last of Earth's defenders. We fight for the survival of the human race. We fight to ensure that our legacy will not be erased. The aliens have taken too much, but we will take it back." A wave of determination washed over Blake. He had been alone for so long, fighting a hopeless war. But now he had a team, an army, of some of the most powerful soldiers ever created. It was time to make a stand. The warriors set out, moving with purpose through the rubble of the city. They traveled in tight formation, their weapons at the ready. Blake followed closely behind Captain Valen, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and hope. These warriors were incredible, but would they be enough to stop the alien invasion? As they made their way toward the first alien-held building, the sound of alien warships overhead reminded Blake of just how high the stakes were. The enemy forces had no idea what was coming. They had underestimated humanity before, but now they were about to see what Earth's frozen super soldiers were capable of. Captain Valen halted the group in front of a heavily fortified alien building, one of the communication hubs the invaders had taken over. It was an imposing structure, constructed of dark alien metal and glowing with unnatural light. The entrance was guarded by dozens of alien soldiers, their weapons raised, watching the street below with cold, calculating eyes. The frozen warriors exchanged glances, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. This was it, the first real test of their power. Valen gave the order with a single word: engage. In an instant, the warriors moved forward, charging at the alien guards with incredible speed and precision. Blake had never seen anything like it. The warriors moved like a coordinated swarm, cutting through the alien soldiers with ruthless efficiency. Their weapons glowed with bright energy, slicing through the alien armor with ease. The enemy forces barely had time to react before they were overwhelmed. Blake watched in awe as the warriors tore through the aliens, their movements too quick and too precise for the invaders to counter. The battle was over almost before it had begun. In mere minutes, the communication hub was secured, the alien guards lying in heaps at the feet of the frozen soldiers. Captain Valen nodded in approval. One down. Several more to go. But we have only just begun. Blake felt a surge of adrenaline rush through him. The frozen warriors were unstoppable. They were more than just soldiers. They were Earth's last hope, and they were about to change the tide of the war. But as the team moved toward the next target, a sense of unease began to settle in Blake's stomach. This victory, though swift, had been too easy. The aliens weren't foolish. They wouldn't let Earth's frozen army reclaim their planet without a fight. There had to be more waiting for them. Something bigger, something far more dangerous. Blake glanced at Captain Valen, who had already turned his attention to the next objective. The battle had just begun, and the alien forces would stop at nothing to protect their hold on Earth. This war wasn't over. Not yet. The alien counterattack. The frozen warriors moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, their steps synchronized and unwavering. Their recent victory at the communication hub had been swift, almost too easy. Blake couldn't shake the feeling that the aliens were biding their time, watching, waiting for something. The sky above was dark and foreboding, the distant hum of alien warships circling overhead a constant reminder that the invaders had not been completely defeated. Captain Valen stood at the front of the formation, his cold eyes scanning the horizon. "Stay alert," he commanded, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "The enemy will retaliate soon. We've stirred their nest, and now they will come for us." Blake nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. Every muscle in his body was tense, his senses heightened. It had been too quiet since their victory, too easy. He wasn't naive enough to think the aliens wouldn't have a response ready. The soldiers marched forward through the abandoned streets, moving from one target to the next, securing each strategic location with terrifying efficiency. Blake could see the ruins of the city around them, once a bustling hub of life, now a ghost town of shattered buildings and broken streets. The air was thick with the smell of ash and decay. But despite the desolation, there was a sense of resolve among the warriors. They had one mission: to reclaim Earth. And with each victory, they grew stronger, their confidence rising as they fought side by side. Blake couldn't help but admire them. These were no ordinary soldiers. These were Earth's ultimate defenders, genetically enhanced and equipped with the finest technology the world had ever seen. As they reached a large open square in the center of the city, Blake's instincts screamed at him. Something wasn't right. Captain Valen stopped suddenly, raising a hand to signal the group to halt. The warriors immediately dropped into defensive positions, scanning the surroundings for any signs of movement. "What's wrong?" Blake asked, his voice barely a whisper. Valen didn't answer immediately. His eyes were narrowed, as if searching the distance for something elusive. Then, with a swift motion, he pointed toward the horizon. Blake's eyes followed his gaze. At first, it was just a distant blur in the sky, something out of place among the clouds. But as it grew closer, Blake's stomach dropped. A massive alien warship appeared above the city, its dark hull blotting out the sun. It was unlike any ship Blake had seen before. The other warships that had attacked Earth were large, but this one was monstrous, dwarfing the ones they had already faced. Its sleek, black surface reflected the light in a menacing way, as if daring anyone to challenge it. "This is it," Captain Valen said, his voice cold with determination. "The command ship. They were waiting for us to advance. Now, they've called in reinforcements." Blake's heart raced. This wasn't just a counterattack. This was a full-scale response from the aliens' highest command. If this ship wasn't stopped, they would be facing an army far beyond anything they had encountered so far. The ground beneath their feet shook as the warship descended lower, its engines roaring with the sound of a coming storm. The alien ship hovered above the city, and from its underside, smaller, heavily armed dropships began to detach. They plummeted toward the ground, each one carrying a platoon of alien soldiers ready for combat. Blake's grip on his weapon tightened. The aliens weren't going to just let the human warriors have the city without a fight. This was a battle for control, and the fate of Earth rested on the next few moments. "Prepare for impact," Valen barked. "We'll fight them off, but stay close. These dropships are just the beginning." As the alien dropships slammed into the ground, their doors opened, releasing a wave of alien soldiers. These were different from the regular invaders Blake had fought before. They were larger, more heavily armored, and armed with weapons that crackled with alien energy. Without hesitation, the frozen warriors charged into action. Blake couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as they moved. They fought with the deadly efficiency of a machine, their weapons flashing as they cut down the alien soldiers in droves. Each blow was calculated, each shot fired with precision. The warriors were an unstoppable force, humanity's last hope. But the alien forces weren't going down without a fight. Their soldiers were relentless, adapting quickly to the new threat. They fought with a ferocity that rivaled the frozen warriors, and soon the square was filled with the sound of blaster fire, the clashing of metal, and the screams of battle. Blake ducked behind a pile of debris, his rifle trained on an incoming alien soldier. He pulled the trigger, and the shot hit its mark, dropping the alien to the ground. But there were more. Always more. He glanced over at Captain Valen, who was leading a group of soldiers toward the command ship, his sword cutting through the air with deadly precision. The captain's focus never wavered, and Blake followed his lead, rallying the other warriors to keep pushing forward. But the battle was not going as smoothly as Blake had hoped. The aliens had brought reinforcements, and they were organized, their tactics more advanced than Blake had ever seen. The frozen warriors were powerful, but they were not invincible. The tide of the battle shifted with every passing moment. A loud explosion rocked the square, sending Blake tumbling to the ground. The shockwave left him disoriented, his vision blurry. He quickly shook it off and looked up. The alien forces had launched a new weapon, some kind of energy pulse, designed to incapacitate their enemies. "Fall back," Valen shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to regroup. We can't take them head-on." Blake's heart sank. They were being pushed back. The aliens had expected them to advance, and now they had countered with a vengeance. But there was no time to dwell on failure. Earth's frozen warriors were the last hope, and Blake knew they couldn't afford to lose this battle. "Fall back," Blake shouted, rallying the frozen soldiers. "Regroup at the command ship. We fight to win." As the warriors pulled back and regrouped, Blake's mind raced. The aliens had just thrown their full force at them, but Earth's warriors had been tested. They were still standing. But would they be enough to push back the alien forces and save the planet? The battle wasn't over yet, but Blake had a sinking feeling that the hardest part was still ahead. The heart of the beast. Blake's pulse raced as he looked at the looming alien warship, its dark form casting an ominous shadow over the battlefield. The skirmish in the city square had been brutal, but they had only won a small part of the war. The massive command ship now hovered just beyond their reach, its engines whirring as it unleashed more waves of enemies into the streets. They had managed to drive back the initial assault, but this was just the beginning. The frozen warriors stood ready, their faces grim but resolute. They were Earth's last hope. Every step forward felt heavier, as though the weight of the planet's survival rested squarely on their shoulders. Blake's breath came in ragged gasps, and his body ached from the battle, but there was no time to rest. "We have to take it down," Blake muttered under his breath, looking to Captain Valen for guidance. He didn't need to say more. Valen understood. The captain turned, his cold, commanding gaze sweeping over the warriors. "The warship controls everything. The aliens are coordinating their forces from that ship. If we don't take it down, we won't survive this. Our next objective is clear. We go after the heart of the beast." His voice was firm, unwavering, as though failure was not an option. Blake nodded, his mind already spinning with the possibilities. They had fought off alien foot soldiers and smaller ships. But this was different. The warship wasn't just a vessel. It was the brain of the invasion. Everything the aliens had done on Earth had been because of this ship. They couldn't afford to let it remain in their hands. The frozen warriors moved as one, a unified force marching through the ruined city, their weapons at the ready. Blake kept close to Valen, his thoughts racing. They had no idea what awaited them inside the warship, what kind of enemies or even traps might be lying in wait for them. The closer they got, the stronger the sense of danger grew. The ground trembled beneath their feet as alien war machines scurried across the battlefield, setting up new defenses. Alien gunfire echoed in the air, but the warriors moved with brutal efficiency, cutting down anything in their path. Blake's gaze turned skyward. The warship's enormous size was now apparent. Its sleek, black surface was adorned with strange, alien symbols that seemed to pulse with an eerie light. It looked as though the ship itself was alive, as if it were aware of the humans approaching and preparing for the battle to come. As they reached the perimeter of the warship, Blake's heart skipped a beat. Several alien forces had gathered around the entrance, guarding it with heavy firepower. These weren't regular soldiers. They were elite shock troopers, heavily armored and armed with plasma guns that crackled with energy. Valen raised his hand, signaling the group to halt. He turned to face the frozen warriors. "We need to move quickly. The longer we stay exposed, the more they can call for reinforcements." Blake tightened his grip on his weapon, stepping forward. The rest of the warriors moved as one, charging toward the enemy soldiers in a synchronized wave. The clash was immediate, blasts of plasma fire lighting up the battlefield as the two forces collided. Blake found himself in the thick of the fight, his rifle spitting fire as he shot down the alien soldiers with deadly accuracy. He moved with the flow of the battle, cutting through enemies as quickly as he could. But no matter how many they killed, more kept coming. The elite soldiers were formidable, and their armor was tough. Blake's shots had little effect against their shields, but the frozen warriors were relentless. Valen was at the front of the assault, leading the charge. His sword gleamed as he swung it in wide arcs, cutting through the enemy ranks with ease. Blake felt a surge of hope seeing Valen lead them so fearlessly. The captain was everything they needed: strong, unyielding, and determined. He had the strength of a leader, and it was contagious. Each frozen warrior fought with the same drive, refusing to back down. But despite their strength, Blake knew the odds were stacked against them. The aliens weren't retreating. They weren't even faltering. They were adapting to the human threat. More reinforcements arrived, and soon Blake found himself in a war of attrition, with the enemy slowly surrounding them on all sides. "We need to push forward," Blake shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't stay here. We've got to get inside the ship." Captain Valen didn't hesitate. "Form up and move. Keep close." With a rallying cry, the warriors surged forward, breaking through the alien lines. Their superior speed and strength allowed them to cut through the enemy forces like a hot knife through butter, but the resistance was growing stronger by the second. The closer they got to the warship, the fiercer the aliens fought. Blake's mind was spinning. They were so close. He could see the entrance, a massive door embedded into the side of the warship, guarded by alien forces that seemed to multiply every moment. Yet they were too close to stop. Earth's survival depended on them getting through that door. Valen was the first to reach it, his sword cleaving through the last line of defense. With a swift motion, he turned the handle on the massive door, and it slowly creaked open. The cold, dark interior of the ship loomed before them, filled with strange symbols and technology that Blake had never seen. "We're in," Valen said, his voice a mixture of relief and determination. "Now let's finish this." Blake followed the captain inside, his mind racing. The ship was silent, almost as if it were waiting for them. The further they ventured, the more Blake felt an unsettling chill run down his spine. They had entered the heart of the beast, but there was no turning back now. As they moved deeper into the warship, a sense of dread filled the air. The ship was vast, its corridors stretching for miles. The walls pulsed with an unnatural energy, and strange alien machines hummed in the distance. Blake felt as though the ship itself was alive, watching them. Then, ahead, they saw movement. A figure stepped out of the shadows, its silhouette towering and alien. It was not a soldier. This was something else, something far more dangerous. Blake's breath caught in his throat. The final battle was about to begin. The awakening of the final weapon. Blake's heart pounded in his chest as they moved deeper into the warship's dark, cold corridors. The walls around them seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, and the air felt thick, as though it was charged with a presence that sent shivers down Blake's spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting. Every step seemed to echo through the silence, but the deeper they went, the more it felt like they were walking into the jaws of some great beast. The strange alien symbols that covered the walls flickered in eerie patterns, lighting up and fading out in time with their footsteps. Blake tried to make sense of them, but the symbols were foreign and beyond his understanding. All he could focus on was the growing sense of dread that clung to him like a second skin. The aliens were expecting them. They were prepared. Captain Valen was leading the charge, his expression unreadable, his every movement precise. He had always been unshakable, but even Blake could see the tension in his jaw. The warriors were formidable, but they were facing an enemy unlike any they had ever encountered before. The warship's design was unlike anything on Earth, its technology far beyond human understanding. It was alien in the truest sense of the word. Blake glanced back at the warriors behind him. They were all moving in sync, each one a blur of cold determination. Their frozen enhancement had made them nearly unstoppable in battle, but Blake couldn't help but feel that they were entering something even more dangerous now. But Blake was already at the panel, his hands flying over the controls. The panel was alien, unlike anything he had seen before. It was covered in strange symbols, but one thing was clear. The core of the warship was powered by an immense energy source. If he could disable it, the alien leader would lose its power. He slammed his hand against the panel, trying to force it open. Nothing happened. The alien leader's energy blast slammed into the wall beside him, shaking the ground beneath their feet, but Blake didn't flinch. He could feel the heat building inside the ship, the countdown to their final chance. If they failed now, it was all over. Then, with a sudden jolt, the panel flickered. Blake's breath caught in his throat. He could see the energy source now, glowing faintly beneath the panel. It was a conduit, a direct link to the alien's power. If he could sever it, the entire ship would collapse. With a roar of defiance, Blake drew his weapon and aimed at the heart of the panel. He fired, the shot hitting dead center. Sparks flew, and the energy pulse surged through the room. The alien leader screamed in rage, but it was too late. The control panel began to disintegrate, the power in the warship beginning to destabilize. The entire ship shook as if it were dying, and the alien leader's form flickered, its power waning. The warriors stood firm, ready for the final blow. Captain Valen, seeing the weakness, launched himself forward, his sword cutting through the alien leader's defenses like a hot knife through butter. In a final, desperate act, the alien leader raised its hand in a last attempt to stop them, but it was too late. With a final slash of Valen's sword, the alien leader fell, its towering form crumpling to the ground, lifeless. Blake stood panting, his heart racing. The warship was beginning to fall apart, the alien technology failing as the power source was destroyed. He turned to Valen, who was standing over the fallen leader. Their eyes met, both filled with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "It's over," Blake said, his voice hoarse. Valen nodded. "For now. But we've won." The warriors let out a collective cheer as the last of the alien forces began to retreat. They had done it. They had stopped the invasion. Earth's final line of defense had held. But Blake knew this victory was only temporary. The war was over for now, but the struggle for humanity's survival was far from finished. The universe was vast, and they had just taken their first step into a much larger conflict. And they would be ready. The Earth's frozen warriors had awakened, and now humanity had a chance to rebuild.